Well now, a huge welcome to you to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my fourth book in the series, and this is called The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness. Now I want to emphasise that this is a novel, and only a novel. Yes, it is based on real people, even some celebrities, and real events. But I need to apologise to you if you feel you've identified yourself, because that was never my intention. The intention is for this simply to be a novel, an entertainment for you. The light. Since buying my tarot cards, I've been watching my tarot horoscopes on YouTube to help me to understand the meaning of the cards. For some time the cards could not be worse, but every reader has emphasised that they simply represent major changes and that they are for the best. Indeed, that I would be blessed with great fortune once I'd overcome the initial problems. A good many tarot readers believed that this meant that I would split from my partner and find my soulmate. But as I'm sure I've found my soulmate, I'm certain this does not apply to me. Nevertheless, tarot readings, like everything, is an industry, and a tarot reader's income depends on pleasing their clients, which includes seeing the bright side of negative cards. Not entirely sure of these readings, I used a meditation technique called Solomon's Temple, which seemed to confirm the readings. There was indeed little to be concerned about, and really this spelt an end to the dark forces which had dominated my thinking for so long. In fact, I became completely bathed in light and realised that this was the spiritual awakening that I'd been looking forward to and anticipating. The leader of the Islamic Defenders Front returned to Jakarta after 3 years in Saudi Arabia, and immediately there was trouble. Undoubtedly this is related to the next general election, but are we to read into this that Indonesia can anticipate a cycle of 3 years of hatred being stoked up, followed by 2 years of relative calm? If so, then simple arithmetic would suggest that things will get progressively worse in Indonesia. Probably unrelated, but a rumour circulated that Hush Puppy's shoes were haram as a result of using a basset hound on their advertising. As always, Maddie was profound and succinct. How can this man be a good Muslim when he speaks like that? He's only pretending to be a Muslim for his own gain. This statement was soon to influence my thinking far more than I could believe. My hiccups continued, and it became obvious to me not only that was this a paranormal attack, but from a new source that I had recently become aware of. Nothing seemed to get rid of the hiccups, nor the bloated feeling in my stomach. Then I received a revelation that I was to stop considering the interplay of events that were consuming me, and only to have good thoughts. But what was really important about this revelation was not that these thoughts had to be undeniably pure, like a 1950s Hollywood religious film, simply devoid of badness. I did this and I recovered. Not totally, but almost. And now I have a practical means of quickly implementing what I've been practicing more cerebrally for so long. I say recovered, but once again I found myself unable to poo, at least more than a small amount, yet constantly feeling like I needed to go. Fearful of the time I soiled myself in Shrewsbury and came close here in the Desa and Jogja, I attempted to go to the toilet many times a day, often with nothing to show for it. Indeed, it was some 2 weeks before my poos became anything like normal, causing my piles to flare up. One of the important interplays of events that was concerning me was that Martin was adamant that he was unable to repay me any of the money that I had loaned to him, and his insistence that he wanted to explain things to me. But I didn't want to speak to him. I wasn't prepared to absolve him. After all, we were considering selling our daughter's home in Jakarta for a fraction of its value, and he owned 3 more expensive properties in Jakarta. Widati could become crippled, and all of his estranged children had comfortable lifestyles. Surely Martin could find somebody to loan him the money to repay me. But maybe he couldn't. Could it be that he'd already borrowed from everyone he knew and ultimately alienated them, including his own children? Thus I lost my only friend in Indonesia. I really am now all alone, with only Made to comfort me. Martin tells a story of buying a Filipino dessert at a supermarket in Jakarta, which completely bloated him and meant that he was unable to defecate. He spent some time in Pondok Indah Hospital, the most expensive in Indonesia, and where Widati was insisting to have her leg operation. Eventually he persuaded them to give him an enema, which cleared his blockage. Doesn't Martin's story sound just like my own paranormal experience? Then there is his mysterious loss of eyesight. For years Martin had given all his money and any he could loan to a fraudster who had promised to make a reality of his desire to leave a benevolent gift to humanity. He had lost every friend, even his own children, and now his wife, in attempting to fulfill this desire. So this would mean that the God whom Martin talks to is not God after all, but the trickster spirit. This began to make total sense, and would certainly explain why Martin's God is a hard, unforgiving God, almost from the Old Testament. So entrapped is Martin by his God that he cannot see the evil in having taken money off me. And now I am in need for my daughter's operation, and he had used to pursue his own misguided fantasy. Indeed, Martin's God has shaped his image of the world as vengeful and requires sacrifice to please. So the sacrifice of others is not a sin, but liberating them. Martin lectures anyone within listening distance on religion and God, setting himself up as truly having the ear of God, even that he is in God's image, when all along it was a trickster. Then what does this tell us about the Messianics? Are they people who do the bidding of a trickster spirit in the name of God? Now, I'm not entirely certain if evil really exists, but for a man to have destroyed himself, his wife, and all around him in the name of God has to be a strong contender for evil. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. William Shakespeare. I met Martin when I was open to suggestion, but have lived my life distrusting those who believe they speak to God, and I now know this to have been a pure instinct. It is only the reason why Muslims believe that God cannot be heard. What we hear is our own heart, and if it is pure and unaffected by spirits, then it may be God's will. But how can we be sure that we are pure and there is no trickster spirit influence us? We don't. So believing we speak to God is all a part of being godlike. Maybe now's the time to explain Martin's project to you. As a Subud member, Martin has an overwhelming passion to use his skills as a modernist architect for the good of mankind. Martin believes that an industrial construction technique which he has invented can be used to build massive, sustainable and smart cities. In fact, Martin's plan is really to construct one large city in which the entire population of the world could live, leaving the rest of the world for agriculture, leisure. What exactly? Now, where have we heard this idea before? Had this idea come from a trickster spirit? Certainly seems like it. But Martin has given all his money, and it would seem some of everyone else he knows, myself included, to a fraudster who has played on his arrogance in promising to make Martin's dream happen. So does this mean that evangelists are infected by a trickster? Quite possibly. Certainly those who are most vociferous in belief, those who are most messianic. Indeed, imposing one's religious view on another is very similar to black magic, where the sorcerer attempts to impose their will on others. Of course, this would apply to everything, not simply religion. It would apply to politics, to worldviews, to opinions. Taken to its logical conclusion, it also applies to morals. So my hunch was correct, that I have no right to impose our morals on others, and that only God has the right to judge, and indeed to punish. I expressed my liberal views when a male cautioned a female for not wearing a hijab on YouTube. Another commented that he hated people like me. Need I say more? But of course, religion and culture are used by narcissists and psychopaths to justify their actions, even to affirm their control. What this revelation does tell us about society: we are led by those who hold the strongest views, those with conviction. But aren't these the people who've most likely fallen under the influence of a trickster spirit? We may call them psychopaths or narcissists, but trickster spirit has every bit as much validity. And yes, we need to find a way to organise society in which such people cannot wreak their havoc. This is more than simply about replacing them, for there are many clamouring to take their place, and even the pure may become affected. No, if politics and business are their habitats, these need to be destroyed. And if money and greed are their modus operandi, we need to rid ourselves of them. Patrick was also less than helpful, accusing me of putting him under pressure, which of course I was. I was asking him to repay me money that he'd taken from me without permission, so I could save Weediati's leg. Is that so bad? It's now apparent that Patrick's recent trappings of affluence were based on a rapid rise in the value of some bitcoins he'd bought. But everything was lost, including the original value, when the Russian exchange was closed by the CIA. Patrick was depressed and believed that he could have been the victim of incredible bad luck. His Porsche was also lost in an accident due to being unintentionally insured. The very same bad luck that all but the elite are currently experiencing. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Patrick's story is somewhat similar to my own, and simply proves the old saying that pride comes before your fall, and don't count your chickens before they hatch. Deep down, I've always known that there is a tower moment when you least expect it, that you are most vulnerable when you believe you're invincible. This is the wheel of fortune. The world simply getting back from the imbalance that the balance of karma implies. It simply reflects how the left hemisphere of the brain so promotes the ego that we're oblivious to the dangers within the world. Nevertheless, Patrick began to pick himself up and will be repaying me the money that he owes me. I've already indicated that when people see individual bad luck and personal tragedies are probably connected, but there's more to it than this. After all, I've long believed that Newton's third law should be applied to absolutely everything, including the Atlantis story, which warns whole civilizations not to become complacent. Atlantis was destroyed by the greed of its inhabitants. Frederick Lindemann, 1st Viscount of Cherwell. Such thoughts coincided with me getting increasingly drawn into the cesspit that now serves for politics in the US. Since the somewhat unconvincing US presidential elections, there's been an outpouring of anger and outright hatred on YouTube. Rather foolishly, when I see accusations of one side or another being Marxist or fascist, I've asked those commentators for evidence, as I have when I've heard of voter fraud. Rather than seeing my question as innocent, I'm immediately placed within a particular paradigm and ruthlessly abused for beliefs I'm assumed to hold. Even when I protest my innocence, I'm called a lying Marxist or racist, take your pick, that the commentator is exposed without ever addressing my original question. It became apparent to me that those posting on YouTube actually had no knowledge whatsoever of what Marx had wrote and what a Marxist actually believes. Indeed, they use the word Marxist to describe the monopolistic owners of capital. Thus I realised how easy it is to hate somebody for their beliefs when you have incorrectly defined what their beliefs are, a definition based on fear that is being whipped up by politicians and the deep state, and which leads to hatred. Thus is the fate of Muslims the world order, to be hated for beliefs and practice which to most Muslims find as abhorrent as they are to their accusers. I was even sent some outrageous videos accusing Obama of being on a mission to convert the US to Islam because all Muslims would go to hell. I attempted to engage with the Christian of Indian heritage who'd sent them to me, not least to find out why, and found him to be every bit as deranged as the maker of the video. I'm sure that there's a deeper meaning to such interactions that I'm still trying to comprehend. Later, another evangelical Christian told me that I wasn't a Muslim because I celebrate the life of Christ, and proceeded to quote me the most reactionary beliefs that I should hold as a Muslim. So reactionary I could not be certain that they come from Islam, rather than a security service attempting to slay Islam, despite him being insistent through selectively quoting Al-Quran. But maybe I'm reading too much into these episodes, because security services have largely given up on trying to influence other countries in specific ways, but simply to create chaos. Because creating chaos for others provides you with the advantage over others, just as our own panic over black magic was exploited by Pa Angabaya. You see, for over a year I've become something of a YouTube addict. It began with me exploring religion and magic, but quickly I was drawn to the lowest common denominator of conspiracies. During this search I came across Sean Atwood, who I remembered from my days as a raver in Manchester. I even wrote to him and he was very kind to me. I followed Sean's every post, taking everything in, even proffering my advice when I was unsure of some of his evangelical guests. Those of you familiar with Sean's channel will be aware of the Callie episode. And whatever your thoughts, you will be aware that Sean has not been entirely honest. Like being introduced to the truth movement, this was something of a wake-up call for me, realising that conspiracies were a business model. Whilst I still enjoy listening to Sean, the Truster's goal, maybe I'm being unfair with Sean, but I'm being honest with my feelings. Thus, I have completely lost trust with all media, be it mainstream or alternative. Then shortly after writing this, Wildman, Sean's friend from Widnes, died, and the world seemed much less welcoming. I might also add that I briefly followed Brian Rose on London Real, watched his band David Icke interview. I was taken in by Brian's apparent shock and grief that I offered to put him up here in Java while he recovered, not least as it reminded me of the extreme stress following an incident when the national press had camped on my doorstep. Brian's response was to put me on the mailing list for his business accelerator courses. I'm somewhat sceptical about his digital freedom platform, but was shocked and somewhat depressed when I discovered it to be a scam. His bid for the London mayor simply went over my head, as by then I'd lost all confidence in Brian. It's easy to blame the alternative media, but for years I have been conditioned by the BBC, beginning when I first became a sales representative, driving round the UK, often with only Radio 4 to keep me company. I'd not realised how slowly I was feeding my own prejudices and moral outrage, only accessing news which confirmed my prejudices. I had no idea how, in doing so, this feared porn was destroying my ability to focus, reducing my brain function, and creating the stress which would affect me physically. Of course, things are now a far cry from the objectivity of Radio 4 in the 1980s. But we were all tricked into a sense of superiority, that our beliefs were indeed representative of the thinking population. Not least as the market for entertainment and advertising has destroyed the truth, probably forever. In part, as someone who uses social media selectively and infrequently, I was somewhat unaware of what was happening, content in my superiority that Radio 4 wasn't Facebook. But somewhere along the line, the investigative journalism and ethics gave way to the only way is Essex, all of which indicative of how psychopathy has infected our every institution and social interaction. As to a psychopath, image is everything and truth something to be constructed. But these were only beliefs and not feelings. If only I'd trained my feelings and not beliefs when I was at university, maybe I could have avoided this trap. Months after writing this and reflecting on my own life, I realised that my own indoctrination had begun many years earlier. At the age of 3, my parents moved from Shrewsbury to a village to the south of Shrewsbury. My father bought a new store, which he converted to include a hairdressing salon for my mother and a grocery store for himself, with a flat above it in which we lived. I do have some vague memories of not being entirely happy about the move. There were new friends to make, new places to play, but my enduring memory was of being left to fend for myself by my parents. Not that I'm claiming I was neglected. I was going to say that I watched television all day long, but that's not true, as there was no morning nor daytime TV during the week. But when the TV was on, I devoured old westerns and war movies. In fact, anything that was on TV. What impact did this have on me? Well, even to this day, I'm somewhat uncomfortable with silence when I enter a house. I immediately reach for the TV, Radio 4, and now YouTube. I have a feeling that this was more than anything which curtailed my paranormal development. In fact, I do have recollections of sometimes taking my abilities too far and frightening myself. Then having the TV on was an reassurance. But what other ways did the TV impact on me? I may never know. Certainly I did not grow up wanting to become a cowboy or a soldier. But what it did was that the TV forced me into the materialistic world. Not just in solace from my own paranormal fears, but in curtailing what I believed was possible. Fortunately, I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched kept the door slightly ajar, at least within suburban America. As political events unravel in the US, I'm left pondering to what degree I've become victim of conspiracy theories. There no longer appears to be any truth within the world, and in US politics, truth isn't even seen as ideal. Indeed, Dan Ali has shown that people lie a staggering 90% of the time. Individuals are honest only to the extent that suits them, including their desire to please others. Dan Ali, predictably irrational, the hidden forms that shapes our decisions. So I have fallen for a number of conspiracy theories. Who is responsible for them? Also, despite being willing to accept that much that I have believed over the last year could be false, I refuse to completely give up on them all. As once truth starts to be so savagely dispensed with, where is the safe haven truth seekers can shelter within? Society depends on trust and truth to function. Think of the impossibility of simple things like going on holiday if you no longer trust anymore. So the economy requires a high level of truth and trust simply to function. For this reason, most of us have a very high tolerance to untruths and lies, because it's simply too difficult to question everything. But for me, at least, this tolerance has been breached, and the numbers who think like me is growing. Our leaders have created a Power of Babel built on lies, which will surely fall. The question is, how much of what we call civilization will fall with it? Put simply, we've allowed our leaders and businesses to destroy the truth. But eventually, all trust will go. And when it does, where can we turn? Maybe electronic money will be the catalysts. We're all prepared to accept there is value in paper money. But can we be confident in something which is stored on our mobile phones? Certainly in Indonesia, the 5G network is only sufficient in large cities for electronic money to come close to being practical. In Ardesa, I cannot see people no longer using money just because the government says it's no longer tender. Indeed, if money disappears, traders will reinvent it, and locally there will be greater confidence in that than something stored on a mobile phone. Perhaps more sinisterly, I became aware of members of the British Army's 77th Brigade, which developed from the unorthodox tactics of Major General Orde Wingate, posting comments on the same YouTube sites that I watched and posted on. Given that the 77th Brigade's remit is to achieve stability overseas, it perplexed me why they were engaged in misinforming the UK public over a health issue during peacetime. To my surprise, I became quite adept in identifying comments by members of the brigade and began to delight in exposing them. One exposed member accused me of working for Russia, Moldova or Argentina, and it occurred to me that this is what they had been told, and refused to believe that we were simply concerned citizens, who for the most part resided in the UK. I later found myself exposing Mossad operatives and FBI contractors on other channels. Many of these people were posting were not unnaturally deeply concerned that the WHO, the UN, especially Agenda 21 and 30, but a consensus seemed to emerge that the WEF was the most suspicious globalist organisation. And now I have to admit that I did have some concerns about these organisations, along with the IMF and the World Bank, not least their desire to launch digital currencies, which would allow them to effectively vary the rate of their loans at the push of the button. But as I started to investigate the documents others were purporting to be conclusive evidence of a conspiracy by a New World Order, I found them to be much like the policy documents I had utilised, even contributed to as a researcher. This then resulted in me investigating the World Economic Forum, WEF, which I found to be a membership organisation for senior executives of large corporations. Certainly senior politicians were also invited to Davos, along with individuals supporting often somewhat controversial new ideas which were believed to be of interest to world leaders. Herein lies the basis of the conspiracy theories. A good many people posting on these sites that I had taken these controversial ideas as plans and not thought pieces. That such ideas often link into strategies like Agenda 21 and 30 should come as no surprise, as this is exactly how public policy is developed. But even the strategies are merely goals, not evidence of a new world order. In short, the WEF is no more important nor unimportant than the local Conservative club is to your local town or city. Of course, when important people get together, whether at the local Conservative or club or Davos, there is fractionalisation and collusion. Also, those attending become aware of business opportunities, which some will act upon, or why else would they attend? Well, maybe the cheap beer. So my Illuminatum really are justified and ancient, with still no master plan. Lyle, Colty and Drummond. Yes, I have my own Operation Mindfuck. Of course, such complexity is misunderstood by everyone, as we are being encouraged, possibly by the 77th Brigade, to take polarised positions, which simplifies everything to predetermined arguments and positions. Indeed, I see many divisions and tensions within the elite, pulling in slightly different directions. By way of illustration, sometime after writing this, the European Super League was announced, which included the team I'd given so much of my passion towards, Manchester City. Seeing the club in opposition to its supporters, the other football owners, football governance and the government. As a 62-year-old male who's already provided for the rest of my life, just about, I am somewhat resistant to change and fearful of how yet more unanticipated events will affect my plans. I'm also mindful that with every crisis and policy shift, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But such observations are not indicative of a new world order, simply the underlying power relationships within the world. Such thoughts also brought me great hope, that the die was not already set and that individuals could impact their own destiny. And of course, it is exactly through such notions that we defeat evil, which may be behind world events. Was this the light I was shown in Solomon's temple? Then what is light but an absence of darkness? And that begins with oneself. Knowing your darkness is the best method of dealing with the darkness of other people. Carl Jung. Lest I be called a denier and possibly banned by YouTube, let me be clear. I'm not intending to deny anything. Although I would add the observation that vaccines are the perfect consumer product, and there's no need to engage in advertising when one's fellow man will make one feel selfish for not consuming. What I do see is a series of crises: the environment, terrorism, finance, health. And I'm not denying the existence of any. But what I do see is reactions which appear to increase fear and panic. What I also see is people getting rich from the crisis. Indeed, with each crisis, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So it would seem that some people have an incentive in overstating the severity of these issues rather than addressing the underlying problems. But I emphasise there is only some sections which benefit from crisis. Most companies, especially small and medium, require stability, whilst banks and those selling solutions to disasters who benefit. Now, some readers will argue that I'm engaged in a leap of logic, but as Jim Garrison argued, that we need to look for patterns to understand power and meanings, time and propinquity, as that is how the empaths think. But also how conspiracies are developed and huge mistakes made. Turning to history, it becomes increasingly apparent to Soviet leaders that they'd failed to create the socialist utopia the Bolsheviks had promised. Furthermore, the disillusion with the system was creating dangerous economic crisis, which was eventually to bring down the system. But everyone was so used to the system, not simply its politicians, that nobody could contemplate change. The politicians therefore continued as normal, explaining that everything was fine and normal, when everyone knew it wasn't. This became known as hypernormalism. Now, doesn't this describe the current world, its economic system, its politicians, especially since the last financial crisis? Maybe paradoxically, the process has gone further in China. Not simply the surveillance and social credits, but the complete destruction of truth, and with it any notion of the truth. Furthermore, China is even more hypocritical, allowing its leaders the freedom it bans its citizens from enjoying, and maybe, consequently, paranoid of all forms of criticism than the rest of our suspicious world. What has really gone wrong? Is it simply the belief that we can control the world and build a better future, when we have turned our backs on the simplicity God placed us here with? Of course, the reality that has been weaved for us is so pervasive, and we have so much to lose if the normality is not normal. But could we be blinded by behavioural program, shopping and Prozac? But then, if we are not being encouraged to believe in a better world, then isn't the world better? If we can be encouraged to see a better world, then that's no bad thing, providing it works and those chinks do not become chasms. But then underlying power, relationships and hoarding of God's resources go unnoticed. Indeed, the insistence that everything is normal when all around is chaos and breaking down is a typical trait of the narcissist. What is misunderstood in the West is the nature of China and its support from within. The West believes that, like the Soviet Union, the Chinese system is unstable and will eventually collapse. And this is true. But not before the West is sent into complete turmoil. China has delivered massive economic benefits to its citizens, as did the Soviet Union with its initial industrialization. Whilst the Chinese public are critical of the excesses of its leaders, they will only turn against them when the system can no longer deliver benefits, and the rich began to see the impoverishment of the poor as a valid strategy. But the rich in the West have been doing exactly the same since the 1950s, and we're all now aware of their deteriorating economic position. Technological advances are no longer delivering economic benefits, but simply redistributing wealth from the poor to the rich. So technology will not save us. Indeed, is anything new really being discovered, or simply new ways to make money out of the same inventions? Is this because the scientific method is now restricting innovation rather than encouraging it? The West's answer appears to become more authoritarian, like China, but using the West's own logic, this cannot prevail in the long term. No, only more democracy and not less can save us. We need to turn our backs on the experts who are following the logic of the Enlightenment that has now run its course, as everything, as a machine, no longer serves mankind. So now is the time to allow the common man to make common sense decisions once more. China can overtake the West through AI, as AI plays into its strength, its massive population to train algorithms. Whilst the West may be paranoid at the prospect of this, it's inevitable. Attempting to keep up with China is futile and only leads to further problems for the rest, as it will not create the economic conditions to placate the population of the West. So the Greens have a point. We must get used to low or zero growth, even decline. But this will only be accepted if it's seen to be equitable. Ultimately, this is the reason why war with China is seen as an acceptable outcome by some Western politicians. You may see this as alarmist, but the war has already begun. A war of words, an economic war, a cyber war, a black ops destabilising countries and governments. Even this war, with all our expertise, is ill thought out, as eventually the power of AI will prevail. The West has pursued a policy of divide and rule. Those who have been marginalised in the West are treated as our enemies. We call them spice zombies, losers, scroungers, migrants. But they're humans too. But maybe the demonisation of Islam is the greatest mistake, as it's pitted us against Russia and China. And China with Russia is a formidable enemy. China, in contrast, has made friends in the forgotten continent of Africa. Just maybe there's some truth in the rumour of secret weapons using technology which seems incredible to us. And that is the reason for America's bravado. But is this what we really want? The parallels with the Great War are so strong. And then it was the poor who gave their lives in the trenches. Yes, Germany was momentarily destroyed, but it signalled the end of the British Empire's hegemony. But we have more. Than sufficient to satisfy our needs. What we need is a moral rearmament, not physical rearmament. I'm proposing a return. Am I proposing a return to the Dark Ages? Well, maybe I am. But a Dark Ages in which we have already made the advancements we need to sustain ourselves. A Dark Ages in which religion and spirituality replace our commitment to the religion of science. Rather paradoxically, through listening to a New Age practitioner, I found myself getting closer to Allah, and indeed even understanding some of the beliefs of the Messianics. Maybe this is a bad choice of words, as it has a number of precise meanings, but I was looking for an alternative to evangelists, if not their resultant prescriptions. You see, the Creator, whom we call God, or Allah, is all love. This is the light, and I've been drawn to when I meditate. This is the message we have heard from him, and announces to you that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. The Bible, 1 John 1:5. So there is no evil, nor Satan per se, only an absence of God. The greed and hatred which now dominate the world are not due to evil, but not enough love. Not enough trust in one's fellow man, in God's other creations. This would mean that the Kajawan goal of suppressing the unwanted effects of the ego really is a path to a oneness with God. In previous episodes, I discussed how it is believed that black magic cannot harm somebody who is truly good, and how Parcano had told us that we can feel black magic. It cannot kill Maddie and I. Also, how the ministry of most religions believe that God and prayer can protect from black magic and be used in exorcism. Of course, it is all related to this light, because if there is light, there is no darkness, and therefore no black magic. So I was correct in my instinct nearly 4 years ago that the least appropriate response to black magic attack is to resort to black magic, even in defence. An instinct I held as a teenager when I refused to defend myself or fight aggressors. Gosh, so it's taken me nearly 4 years and considerable pain to learn these lessons. And maybe that's the point, that these were lessons I needed to learn. As always, no sooner had I had these positive thoughts and the questions as to where these conspiracies came from came to my mind. There are just too many conspiracies, as some are just so convincing for them to be entirely random. Even if we knew is responsible for these conspiracies, we're still left with the question, why? Is it simply about money? If the mainstream media has dispensed with the truth, recognising that stories about the lives of minor celebrities, be they truth or fictitious, are more profitable than investigating world events, then why wouldn't the alternative media invent conspiracies? Maybe. But here's the most important thing about the revelations, and that is that we no longer need to contemplate the cause of evil. Like the 1960s American sociologists trying to identify the causes of crime. In fact, in trying to understand the motivation for evil, we're simply adding to the evil in the world. One does not become enlightened by imaginating figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. No, we only need to contemplate the light and love. What exists beyond the boundaries of the light is not our concern. We remain in the light and encourage all to join us. Oh dear, I hope this doesn't sound like evangelism. So my revelation to think good thoughts, to rid myself of hiccups, was somewhat partial, as it's all about harnessing this light. This means that I must stop blaming the psychopaths and the narcissists for my feelings. Not just my mother and my former partner, but the elite who are responsible for the disastrous events currently shaping the world. There's no need to keep focusing on what the elite are doing and what they are doing and why they are doing it, simply to remain in the light. In doing so, we ignore the narcissist, which not only really annoys them, it means that their activities no longer exist. So yes, we can save humanity by our own thoughts. In fact, it's our own thoughts that create the darkness. Indeed, turning psychopaths and narcissists into monsters only creates these monsters. We can only escape their control by loving ourselves and realising that they cannot harm us if we're not frightened by them. And now, I'm not recommending that you should enter or re-enter relationships with them, but stop being frightened, for this is your basis of their power over you. Indeed, we must create our own power to defeat their worldview. We meet ourselves time and time again in a thousand disguises on the path of life. Carl Jung. To a degree, we're aware of the effects of gaslighting and manipulation have on our consciousness. So our best defence, and indeed remedy, is the light. Indeed, I have heard the light being described as a fire which burns negative energy. Put another way, if we stop being the victim, we are no longer victims. If we live in a world of love, and there is no room for greed and hatred, no room for psychological manipulation, no room for authoritarianism and equality. What this does not mean is that the narcissist or psychopath can be cured through love, understanding and compassion. No, these beliefs perpetuate the abuse and that the psychopaths hold over you. But if you walk in the light and no longer seek explanations, nor to change others, indeed, to a large degree, the light is simply rediscovering your old self before it was destroyed by the narcissist. Carl Jung describes those people whose mission is to help others as light workers, and I'm beginning to understand why. Of course, Parcono has told Maddie that this is our mission, but Maddie is still reluctant to embrace it. Maybe he knows what I've begun to understand, that the way to rid ourselves of the pains we feel is through embracing our calling, and that this is inevitable. Is this because our dark night is not yet over? Could it be that the evil we feel in the world is designed to lengthen the dark nights of all light workers, so we cannot begin our mission? There can be no rebirth without a dark night of the soul, a total annihilation of all that you believe in, and through that you wear. Hazard Inyat Khan. Perhaps this only explains my last 3 episodes. Not only explains my last 3 episodes, but also the mission that I began searching for. The meaning of life, as I've kept calling it. You see, no one can understand the light without first understanding the darkness. But I wasted so much time trying to justify it, when the solution was simply to see it as an absence of light. I've kept reiterating that it's been a wonderful journey, but not one I would wish on anyone. I've no idea if I'm reaching the end of the dark night. But even if I am, what about Maddie? It seems to me that I'm closer to concluding my dark night than Maddie, and I'm here to help her. Indeed, my ending feels close. But deep down, I, along with all around us, know that when Maddie is finally ready, she will be the most wonderful light workers. The endurance of darkness is the preparation for great light. St. John of the Cross. As always, I am impatient and anxious to begin. Yes, my journey has taught me patience, and maybe that's it, for I cannot really begin until I lose the desire to do so. Also, as always, everything feels like I've been on an apprenticeship. Every new bit of information contradicting the last, as that was the whole point. No, not because we have a parasite or djinn who feed off our emotions, although we do, but because I cannot escape what I have been taught to believe and my ego from pulling me back until I trust my feelings and dispense with my beliefs. You see, there's nothing but light, and I have to dispense with everything else to walk and to work within the light. But I've learned not to rely on anything, and more particularly anyone from the past. I have to abandon the UK, and I've already lost my every friend in Indonesia, and thus I'm finally ready to begin my new life here in Indonesia. Is this really the legacy of the health crisis? For it's destroyed everything I once believed in, every bit of security I once had, and probably lost me my remaining friends, who now see me as a right-wing conspiracy theorist. A little later, I realised I was wrong about Maddie. She'd been through a dark night, and for her it really was just a night. As the revelations came to Maddie in a flash, when we fled to Jumba. But Maddie is now in the emptiness stage, wanting her old life back and not seeking to move further. Perhaps it's because her revelations were so shocking. But Maddie, along with Kano, and I know that there is an inevitability to this journey. Some Buddhists would see Maddie has now experienced the resistance of the ego, seeking to distance herself from those that have harmed her. Certainly it's apparent that Maddie feels more hurt in the world than I, and who can blame her for not wishing to increase this pain? These revelations eventually led me to once again our experience of black magic. Could it be that Maddie and I actually did experience the effects of black magic, but warnings from our empathetic subconscious that something was wrong? Then if this is true, how would we know what is true? Could it mean that black magic has the greatest impact on the empath, but ultimately it cannot harm them? Maddie and I were able to pick up on the narcissism and bad intentions of our neighbours. Finding evidence of rituals simply reinforced our feelings. So the psychological theory of magic is far more profound than it's purported to be. The physical sensations we felt and Maddie's loss of sanity were simply our brains attempting to cope with the overload of information coming from our subconscious. If this is true, then there is really little point in the practice of black magic, because ultimately the world will balance out these forces, karma. But even more importantly, it would question the assumptions behind psychiatry and provide fundamental challenges to psychology. I also found that some Buddhists and Taoists see my revelations about light and desire to become a light worker as an immature development, a yearning to bring some reason back into my life when I should be content in the nothingness. These traditions would also recognise Maddie's reluctance as noble, as unlike Kano and myself, she has no desire to influence others. And as she has no desires of her own, no dual consciousness, save to be a loving mother and wife. Remember how Martin had destroyed every life around him through his delusion. I have at least to consider this one of the lessons I've been shown. Indeed, is my desire to become a light worker any nobler than Martin's evangelism? Can I unwittingly be feeding the low parasites who feed off their emotions of those I seek to help? So long as man clamours for the I and the mine, his works are naught. When all love of the I and the mine is dead, then the world of the Lord is done, for the work he has no aim of getting of knowledge. When that comes, the work is put away. The flower blooms for the fruit. When the fruit come, the flower withers. The musk is in the deer, but we seek not within itself. It wanders in quest of grass, kabir das. However, the concept of the delight and the desire to be a light worker is well grounded within the Sufi and Kajawan traditions which I follow. Nevertheless, I've discovered every time that I feel I've reached the final revelation, a new one comes to contradict it, and maybe, yes, it's simply a temporary phase in my understanding. Perhaps it's a useful explanation for the light and the dark night is that in me getting back in touch with my right brain hemisphere. So the contradictions are simply the interplay between the hemispheres. Why am I now reintroducing myself to the right brain? Is it simply that I've reached what Jung describes as the second half of my life? I'm beginning to break free of the left brain training that our education system is all about. Or also, as Jung would argue, the darkness, in my case brought on by psychopathic abuse, ultimately led me towards the light, as the darkness both resides within the right hemisphere, but so too does the synthesis. A few months after this episode, and I asked Maddie about the light, and she confessed that it had already come to her when she was married to Prama. So maybe Maddie is really far more advanced on her journey than Parcano and myself. Her worldly generosity is simply the healing tricks which Parcano does, and I am anxious to do with the light. Later again, Parcano came to me whilst I was meditating, whilst he was physically away on a meditation retreat. He explained to me that because the light came from God, that it transcended all universe, and this is the reason why it would be recognised by all of God's creation. The tendency of motion physics is to resolve the whole material universe into waves, and nothing but waves. These waves are of two kinds: bottled up waves, which we call matter, and unbottled waves, which we call radiation or light. If annihilation of matter occurs, the process is merely that of unbottling imprisoned wave energy and setting it free to travel through space. These concepts reduce the whole universe of the world of light, potential or existent. So the whole story of its creation can be told with perfect accuracy and completeness in the 6 words. God said, "Let there be life." Sir James Jean's The Mysterious Universe. Indeed, it simply reminded those who had transgressed the universe God had placed them in to return to those universes they were familiar to them, and to seek the state of bliss that I had experienced in the light. Later that day, a very surprising tarot reading on YouTube expanded on this. I've always maintained that we create our reality, and we do this by creating universes. But the reader said that we co-create with God. And now, this may have been a throwaway comment by her, but it's truly profound as it explains how God creates everything, omnipotent, but that we have free will. She went on to say that we can only do this through love. The implication being that if I am using the light, I can create my own universe. But if I reject the light and succumb to greed, desire, etc., then I enter a universe that's created by another. Amazingly, this is at least partially supported by neuroscience. Because as a result of neuroplasticity, our brain changes its connection with every decision we make. So we create our reality through a new connection within our brain. Furthermore, stress affects the creation of these connections to such a degree that we can detect differences between the brains of urban and rural areas, especially with the amygdala, which can be partially offset by meditation. The constant fear of danger and disaster within the news has this same effect of keeping us constantly under stress. This partially explains why we have recovered hearing Gun and Geedle, and that my daily routines, including meditation, were really a part of my own recovery. If we reject the light, we become these actors playing out roles of being obsessed by money, sex, power, whatever, or at least in this particular universe. So what really does begin why people simply seem to follow orders and to commit atrocities, as they are playing out roles dominated by the wills of others. So my original exploration of black magic has come full circle and really does explain so much about everything, or maybe nothing, depending on your perspective. Now, could this be an explanation for narcissists and psychopaths that they have rejected the light? A concept that I must return to for some time. God created us in such a way that the inner self is the spiritual world and the outer self is the physical world. This soul was part of the spiritual part of us, which belongs in heaven. Could it be planted in the physical way, as a seed is planted in the ground? Emanuel Swedenborg. Well, that concludes this chapter from my fourth book, The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness. And it's actually the final in this series of books. I'm not saying I won't write another book, but I feel this series is now complete. I really hoped you enjoyed it. And now I'm going to add a new chapter every week to this book. So if you want to hear about it, subscribe and hit the bell. Now, I'm not doing particularly well with these eBay, YouTube algorithms. So if you could hit the like button and make some comments, I think it helps me. I hate to ask you for this. I hate it when I hear people coming out with this sort of statement. But the truth is that this has been like a full-time job for the last 4 years of my life. And I'm still a long way off from receiving any money whatsoever for it. So I really do need to, I suppose, beg you. Subscribe, like, make comments. And thank you very much.